AI, accelerated cloud adoption, and hybrid work are fundamentally shifting how business gets done. The old way of securing your people, apps, and data doesn't work and scale anymore. To stay ahead, today's organizations need to reimagine their security and networking infrastructure with a cloud-first, unified SASE architecture. Join Palo Alto Networks and leading technologists from across the globe for SASE Converge 2023, a two-day virtual experience, November 15th through 16th, revealing how SASE, powered by advanced AI, can drive better security and networking outcomes. Register today at securityweekly.com/Palo Alto. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Josh Goldberg about bringing AppSec messages to developers, from conference presentations to one-on-one discussions. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with Lee Neely, and it's just about time for the news. And I pause there for an announcement, but we don't have any because we have so much fun and news to go into. And Lee, I'm glad you're here because I've been boring poor John to death with technical deep dives and reading lots of C code, but there are lessons in C code. And we have here a Citrix Bleed, which is very reminiscent of the Heartbleed vulnerability. But I don't think we need to go into too much depth on the C code because it's actually very simple, both to demonstrate the exploit. I think the exploit code itself was 27 lines of Python, which, okay, you can run that against unauthenticated against your Citrix device, and it's going to bleed some memory. In that memory happens to be some secrets, like some private keys, for example. Mm-hmm. In other words, bad things happen. So that's pretty awesome. But what I thought was interesting was it's a nice write-up in the sense of they're talking about using Ghidra and doing a bin diff to do some binary analysis to figure out what functions changed within the two versions. And then they went and focused in on an SNPrintf was where the vulnerability was. And I thought that was really fun to highlight because at a low level of code maturity, you might just say, well, let's replace all of our sprintf with snprintf because it has an explicit counter for that we're going to drop about our buffer. But if you don't appreciate the nuance of what the return value of that snprintf does, you might still misuse a buffer because snprintf will say, well, this is how much data I was going to write as opposed to how much data it actually did write into a buffer. And that, dear friends, is what happened here. And so then the buffer gets overwritten. It starts to pull from just some random points in memory, and that random points in memory happens to have some sensitive data in it.
Because I remember being, schooled on don't just use printf or sprintf because issues and grudgingly stopping. I haven't done a whole lot of app writing in a long time, but I've certainly made more than my share of errors. Thank goodness there were things to help me find them, including, swift kick in the backside. But I'm getting these flashbacks. So we still got the printing buffer overflow problem for how many decades now?
Oh, too many. It's probably, I forgot to look, but that's one of those problems that probably has like a CWE in the double digits. It's one of the early ones. It also made me think, Lee, in our discussion with Josh, you had brought up, generative AI or AI in the sense of SAST or the sense of even, writing abstract presentations. Here, I would be really curious to see if an LLM would rewrite some code to be quote unquote more secure, meaning an sprintf to the snprintf version. But would it have that nuance of they're still dealing with the return value from that function, and therefore it would have basically created this very instance we're looking at, or would it have understood that there's still a misuse in a buffer somewhere later? I'm very skeptical on that latter part.
I would think it would depend a lot on what it was trained on. I mean, if it had a training model that said this stuff is fine, guess what? But that doesn't mean we couldn't come up with one with a good training model that would catch this. Probably in the more work required column, but still, I think with the work that others are doing that we'll be talking about, there's a future there that we don't have to get our own toys out and build, assemble our own tool. It's just not necessarily available, here today, the beginning of November.
No, and yes, we're that's some good foreshadowing about a secure future. We'll come to that in a second, because there was another vuln that I did want to highlight that was for a very different reason. So this is an Atlassian vuln, and this from the FAQ. It's a very scary sentence. This improper authorization vulnerability, which means it can be exploited by an unauthenticated attacker to reset the instance's database. So you have an unauthenticated attack to basically delete your entire Atlassian data, your instance. What stood out to me on this was how much the write-up for the had some messaging from the CISO, and they're saying this is really important on on Halloween. Please patch this. We haven't seen exploitation yet, and then 3 days later we've seen exploitation in bold. Please, really, you need to patch this.
Right. I always something that says take your instance down or lock it up because this is bad, to me just jumps out. I can't imagine people ignoring that. It's and then of course they gave us a heads up, but unfortunately the hackers got the proof of concept and started rolling, which is it's what they do. I mean, I'm not gonna hold it against them. It's our world now. But the other interesting thing with Atlassian, this is the third or fourth they've come up with this year, where you go patch your data center version, and I'm like, can we move to the hosted version, because they seem to keep that up on top of it. I'm sure it's not feature free. I'm just thinking that the exposure time is much shorter there. They're spending their resources on it. And I'd have to, although I'm thinking I've heard there's not necessarily feature parity with what you can do in the data center version. So we don't want to stop the productivity of our developers that actually use it. That would be bad. But I'm still thinking it's time to, hey, come on, let's look at their hosted version, see if we can be as good without having to. I mean, imagine I've got that down, and then the team actually is trying to use it because I haven't permission to patch it yet. I mean, I don't want to be in that conversation. No, thank you.
No, that's a rough one. And that idea of just, transferring risk or transferring responsibility. Let's have Atlassian curate, maintain this rather than ourselves in our own data center is a very appealing argument to me. It's just similar. Yeah. We talk a lot about too, like who in this day and age runs their own MTA. You're running your own email server. You're asking for all sorts of headache, let alone just dealing with, black hole lists, things like that, in addition to just keeping it secure.
I suspect even in the developer space, if we ask people to raise their hands who ran their own MTA once upon a time, most of our listeners would put their hands up. Including I've done my time. I get it, and I've outsourced. I don't need to do that anymore. It's the risk and the headaches. Actually, I'm willing to pay somebody else to have those headaches, and that also allows us to focus on what we really want to do, work on our mission objectives. If pardon the cliche, but that's really what it's all about.
It is. And I think it's also engaging. We also talked with Josh about how to engage an audience, find where are their pain points, where they're critical. And one of the things that a lot of developers don't want, some of them do appreciate just keeping your software up to date. That's just a code quality issue. And incidentally, It has some great security to it. But if we turn to another article about just a few billion websites that need to upgrade their jQuery. So this is an article from the OpenJS Foundation that went through and said, there's a lot of jQuery out there, about almost 2 billion sites use jQuery, and over 750 million require an upgrade. Now, there's some implications that it makes that I don't know that I fully agree with. It's saying their security and privacy are at risk. I agree in principle, but I read through this article, and what I was struggling to figure out is like, are we really telling 750 million sites, if that's the actual number, that they need to, go upgrade to the latest version of jQuery? Because good luck. That just doesn't seem like it's going to happen. There's got to be a different way to approach this.
Well, somewhere I was skimming through it, there was something about they said they kind of softened their tone and said at least one open source package in a billion of websites that's just is out of date. That I buy. I mean, how do you keep? You not only got to update, but you got to qualify that the new version actually works. I mean, way back in the day when I was doing Perl, I know I said a nasty 4-letter word. You get new versions of the add-ons, and they changed the API all around. You couldn't just compile the new one and go. No. You had to rewrite your code, or you just left the old buggy one there because it was 1994. But my point is that it's easy for me as a security guy to ignore the quality assurance part of just download and run the new one. I mean, and I pity anybody who just gets that said to them. That's not very kind.
No, and one of the things this is part of the OpenSSF effort, and I've really enjoyed with what the OpenSSF has been doing this year. They've refocused on investments in creating memories, rewriting into memory safe languages. They've done a lot of work on adding fuzzers. In other words, they've done a lot of work that goes beyond just, hey, you have a problem. By the way, hey, you have a problem. And one of the things that I'll say disappointed about this write-up is that as a result of the study, they were going to develop a free healthy web checkup tool, which in a way is just, hey, it's good, but it's sort of, it's yet another, by the way, you need to update. Hopefully it will give those nuances between you're just a major version behind versus you are a major version behind and you have a security flaw. What I would love to see is more of that Dependabot style approach where GitHub says, to your point about testing, oh, by the way, you're behind on a major or minor SemVer version. We ran whatever automated tests you already have in your acceptance tests. So far, it looks to pass. Do you want to click approve to merge this? Right. Now, that I love that approach. It does still put a burden on having a good test suite. So I acknowledge there's still some work for developers, but I think having a good test suite seems more reasonable for them to look at.
And if they're going to offer to merge me in a fix, I'd feel really good if it was coming from, well, I'm thinking of the Google AOSP project where they have, an assured signed version of the package they're going to deliver you. And I'm not trying to say that's the only answer, but if I know it's a high quality copy, I'm hopefully more inclined to say, yeah, let's do this, as opposed to something I'm not sure where it came from, if it's the genuine package. And I know Git has been working really hard on that too, by the way. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. I just want to be sure that if I click OK, I'm not going to be wanting to unclick it and roll back. Because that would be really nice. It would be very nice to have not just an alert, but a proposed solution to that. Makes a whole different conversation.
And so, speaking of proposed solutions, I do want to bring in another article from HackerOne. Now, this, admittedly, it's a bit of it's kind of a marketing blog post. So I'll acknowledge that up front. I fell for the PR, but they're talking about they've paid out more than $300 million now in all-time rewards, and I think this is over. I can't remember how long they are. I want to say roughly a decade, but still 300 million. That's great. But every time, and part of the biggest payouts are the crypto and blockchain organizations, which I appreciate in the sense of that's where you can demonstrate pretty concrete impact, as well as there's some context that's some domain specific context that researchers need typically in exploiting those. So I like that idea of that type of research, whereas other parts of that $300 million, I'm going to guess probably went to subsidizing hackers to run scans like a Burp, a Zap, or even maybe one of the other web scanners that the company could have run themselves. So you're kind of just subsidizing and possibly paying more than you need to be for someone to go and find vulns for you.
Well, one of the interesting things they say in here is that the customers are also getting faster at fixing the vulnerabilities that are discovered. It's down to 10 days the automotive and media entertainment industries are like 50% faster than they were originally, which is kind of the goal of this whole bug bounty, was to get that out there. And an interesting side effect, since I work in the .gov space, is a couple of years ago there was a requirement to have a vulnerability disclosure program for all your public-facing internet sites. And now with the big zero trust, that means everything now because it's theoretically all available. Let's not delve too deep into that last statement. Point is, it bled over into the gov space and being required. I think this is a much better place to be in for helping. It's now direct with conditions, helping people find the overlook, because we've all got that overworked single point of failure who unintentionally makes a mistake. And hey, I love that this is working. I'm sure there are people that don't, but hey, I think the bar's going in the right direction to boot.
I think it is. And every time I do bring up one of these, like how much was spent on bug bounties, I also love to add, as unfortunately I don't have any way of finding this out, but my additional question of, okay, 300 million rewards defined. How much money has been spent on the fixing side? Ooh. And again, is that an additional 300 million? Is that part of, that's my budget being spent as, my abstract CISO hat on? And does that mean, was I just doing a bug ops approach, meaning I was just fixing bugs as they come in and reported? Or did I step back and say, you know what, maybe we'll let this area of code burn because we're going to do a refactor into another language, a Go, a Rust maybe, or we're going to focus our framework and we're going to say deploy a React or something that gets rid of XSS for the most part, or we're going to make sure we're going to go and review our cookie attributes, and so we're going to make them lax or strict, as we have a couple of them handling to fix CSRF types of issues. That's where my brain goes, and I wish there was a way to figure that out.
Well, and you actually you backed right into maturity. Do you fix the specific instance reported, the 7 things people found, or you step back and look at your overall approach and framework and try and fix it everywhere? You're going to teach someone to fish, or you're going to catch a fish for them? I think the other is a much better approach. Of course, you could argue if something's really severe, they need to do the spot fix, but I'm not sure that there isn't going to be another hole in that net. That taking a moment to step back and do a thorough check. But and I guess we have to make sure people, when they're responding to bug bounties, actually read the reports that come in. Don't ignore them.
Don't ignore them.
Don't filter those messages to the trash, please.
Speaking of maturity, you've set us now to let's go back to that what you alluded to earlier on about a secure future. So Microsoft, 20 years ago, they were talking about they actually had that Halloween document from Bill Gates that launched their trustworthy computing, and now they're in sort of a trustworthy computing 2.0 era, if you will. But they're calling it a secure future initiative, and I think to me, there's a lot of really appealing things in here because they're really talking about design and design changes. I'll start us off with actually just on the vulnerability part, because they do in one of their points talk about increasing the time they're going to take to fix vulns. And I thought that was kind of interesting because what did they say? We plan to cut the time it takes to mitigate cloud vulns by 50%, which I think is good. It still ties into that idea of maybe I just want to say, I love that they're looking into like that mean time to remediation, mean time to fix, but don't want to stop there. I think that's the only thing that just the speed of fixing, there's a lot more that can be done. And I think, honestly, this article talks about a lot more of those aspects. So I'm curious, which of these areas perhaps stood out to you or appealed to you quite a bit?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that really stuck out to me is that they really want to stand on their commitment to AI, generative AI, to really leverage those tools to help them find and address vulnerabilities. And that's where I think if you get a good model and a good training model under, Microsoft's going to say there's a product there for a mere licensing, but it could well be worth it versus you're suddenly having somebody just sitting there skimming every resource they have to try and find ways to make sure that we're not vulnerable. I think that's how you're going to get the time back. You're going to use computers to do your analysis. But the learning model is going to matter. I'm sure that's going to be very Microsoft focused at first. It's going to be specializing on their stuff, but I'd also put money on this becomes a product for Microsoft. I mean, their reputation precedes them, and I'm okay with that. I mean, just because it might not work for everybody, but I'd give it a shot. Take a look. I mean, what the hell, right?
What the hell? And if Microsoft themselves are seeing 65 trillion signals, there's no grep that's going to easily go through there without producing a lot of noise. So I agree that this is an area where, admittedly, over the last several, I've been skeptical about AI's contribution to security, but as a machine learning, which has been around for quite a while already, makes a lot of sense. This is the proverbial needle in the haystack that you are looking for, or perhaps more specifically, the patterns of attacks. But it's not just the attacks that they're trying, the detection that they're trying to improve. They're talking about better defaults out of the box. So maybe we'll no longer have huge hardening guides. And wow, that would be wonderful to see from Microsoft.
Right, and to check everything to make sure it's secure out of the box. Once again, using a tool instead of an eyeball, I'm good with that. I'm hoping this could help us put to rest the hard-coded password problem. And I've hard-coded passwords in the past. I'll admit it. I don't do it anymore. But it made things freaking easy when you did it. It solved problems, and because every time the environment hicked up and you got stopped because it couldn't authenticate. I get it, but we can't do that anymore.
No, we can't. And I appreciate you saying that too, because it's one of the other underlying themes. And we were talking with Josh is not that like developers don't care about security or AppSec people just lecturing, go do this, you should be doing X, Y, and Z. AppSec folks have made their own mistakes. They've done their own shortcuts as well. So that's why we just need to push towards that constructive, collaborative approach to using things like, speaking of passwords, the two major things that I linked to an more engineering specific article from Microsoft. One was they're talking about moving their identity signing keys to hardened Azure HSM and a confidential computing. So confidential computing isn't something we've talked about too much, but perhaps the nuance there is that the keys are going to remain encrypted even in use. So, they're encrypted at rest, encrypted in transit, but now encrypted in use in this model, which basically is making it harder to get that extraction, harder to get, you can't hard code them, but nor can you do a lot of easy ways of setting up oracles to try to leak them out of that. So that's neat to see. And another will be, I'm curious about the standardizing identity libraries. So will we actually get to a world where you can't pull out, hashes from LSASS, you can't do pass the hash, and TLM is finally dead, and we've gone somewhere better? I'm curious what you think about that. How optimistic are you?
So doing signatures with hardware HSM, not software HSM, is a big deal. Unfortunately, with the speed of computers, you can't buy the cheap one. You've got to have the high speed HSM, or it's not going to keep up. They exist, but Microsoft can afford it. But that's one of the first recommendation. I mean, I was in a presentation from Thales last week, and they were saying that's one of the big ones that they're working on. And so I'm all down with that. Keep it encrypted and used. That one kind of blows my brain. I'm a PKI guy, and I'm kind of going, oh, okay. But going past that, I mean, I'm okay. Hey, if they can figure it out, I'm okay. Let's do it. But then the other, because we really need to keep this stuff protected, and we need particularly our private keys. We've been a little loose, and we can't be. All that formalized stuff that was just a pain in the butt to do it right. The reality is, you don't have to do it yourself. You can outsource it. And so pay somebody else to have the headache. And like we were talking about before, you've got, of course, got to do your risk analysis. I get that, but damn it, look at it. And then just, I've been meaning to go deeper into these articles, because these are really where we need to go. I'm very excited by it. And of course, we're going to have to get better at detecting their leaking too. and responding to those.
Detection is important because one of the things that comes to mind too, and I do agree with you about outsource it, find the experts who can do this. I imagine somebody might try to add that snarky response. Well, if you're an Okta customer, you've been perhaps burned once or twice this year already. If you're a 1Password or you're a Cloudflare, but I don't think that defeats your argument. I think it reinforces the idea of, yes, you do want detection both about your SaaS usage as well as what your SaaS provider is doing. But even with like stealing session cookies, et cetera, being able to have the response from your SaaS provider, I think is still a benefit rather than trying to do everything yourself or having to then re-architect something yourself too.
Well, and you mentioned about NTLM hash and all those traditional methods of basically persisting the authentication once you're authenticated being compromised. We could say, yeah, don't do that anymore. It'd be interesting to see what roles that replaces it and how hard it will be to change. That'll be, it's at some point, some of it's going to have to become just baked in with the new OS. So we don't really get to hang on to the past. Although I guess there are still NTLM hashes enabled today, aren't there? But it's easier if it's baked in and you can change a setting rather than having to go add an add-on module or here, go try the beta version of this. It'll be fine. Actually, I know guys that would try that, but they're not going to go into production with it. They're going to wait. So I'm hoping we can change that underlying layer to be something a little higher assurance, more cryptographic. And of course, when I say crypto, that means CPU cycles. That means higher resource loads. I know that. But the good news is our new CPUs are not getting slower.
No. And we do have to be careful about creating everything as a JavaScript on client side because those tend to be hogs. But, maybe close one or two of your Chrome tabs and let the CPU use that extra time for cryptography.
And in fact, one of the browsers I was clicking in had some new feature where it wouldn't close the unused tabs, but it would reduce their resource footprint so that the stuff you were actively using was more available. It might just be simpler to close a couple tabs, but hey, play with it.
People love their tabs. That's one of the religious wars that we try to walk carefully around, like the Vim and whatnot, but anyway, I do want to turn. Let's have some fun, Lee. I've had some fun talking about Vulns and talking about Secure Future, but there's another fun article from Phil Venables, and this time it's caricatures of security people. Now there's 16 of them, so quite a long list. I found myself nodding and thinking of some names to go with most of them. I think my name didn't come up against any of them, but hopefully I'm not just blinded. But I'll start off. One of the items here was a cryptographer turned security guru. And in this article, Phil has a couple great example quotes from each of these personas. And the quote for this cryptographer turned security guru goes, "If only people more than just me realize that security processes are important, we'd be in a much better place." And that resonates very much as like the old school AppSec attitude that I would love to see disappear, continue to tamp down. It didn't work 20 years ago. So I think we need to try something new. And the only thing I'll add to that too is, in addition to cryptographers, I've seen a little bit of that from the physicists out there, sort of, well, it's just a model, and first start with a spherical cow, as the joke goes. So, but this number 2 item was one that particularly spoke to me.
Yeah, well, number 16 spoke to me because I sit on several boards, and I just spent this weekend at board meetings. The cyber savvy board members, which is funny because I'm on a board for a security organization. It's this organization of security professionals, and they're wonderful. And the trick is, understanding the board's role in security. But the quote there, I met somebody from NSA once, so therefore I'm a security expert, is just hilarious. There are unfortunately less substantive security experts. At the board level, you have to not get in the weeds. That's the other problem. You're not there to operate the organization, you're to govern it. So there better be actually a real security professional farther down that's coming through the CEO to you. That also got me the comments about, there was some in here with the relationship to the board. That's I can't remember which one it was, but it was kind of like, no, that's not right.
Well, even the very first one, we I'll hopefully hope that podcast hosting doesn't fall under self-appointed thought leader, because I'm going to feel really bad if that's the case. Trust me. But
we might be too late for that.
But the quote for that one is, "It's incredible that all CISOs don't report directly to the CEO or the board. That's the only way security can ever be effective." I think that's where you're heading from.
Yeah. No. Yeah, it is. No. There are a lot of places they report, and some are more effective than others, but to the board, no. The self-purported expertise is a dangerous thing. Although I think a lot of us have gotten over that. Then there's the guy who only understands cloud. Why don't we put everything in the cloud? Or better yet, the small business person. Actually, that was something that we were talking about a few days ago in a different context. That your small business may only be able to do one out of N security things, because that's all they can afford. I believe it was a talk from Malware Jake who was talking about that he sees too many security experts come into a small business and say, do MFA, do this, do that. And it's like, and they're going,
and that's a great point. Yeah,
they can only do one thing
because
maybe,
and that goes to that maturity model. The maturity models apply. They are strongly influenced by the size of the org, budget of the org, of time available to them. Because the quote here, in the article is, "You be what?" Because if you do go into a small business and say, "Look, it's only $40. What is it? $40 or $50 maybe for one of the best YubiKeys out there per person." That's one cost. But you also have to deal with account recovery. You have to deal with deploying them. You have to deal with, they get lost. So there are hidden costs there that get complicated, especially if it's a small business with remote employees too. So this is one of the things that I love this article, because it's subtly, or maybe not so subtly, pushing back against a lot of security purism, or just, this is the only way to do things. That was to speak to your reaction about that first one, that the only way security can be effective is if the CISO reports to the board. That doesn't have to be the case. There's a lot of other tactical, strategic things you can do.
Yeah, and if they're too detected from the bottom, if they're too disconnected from the top or the bottom, there's a problem. So anyway, this was a lot of fun. I really did enjoy it, and so I'm thanks for including it. It was definitely a nice highlight.
It is fun. Yeah, we thank Phil for having this, for having some great artwork that goes along with each of these. One last question I have for you, Lee. I won't try to make you self-identify on this. We'll skip that part, but there were 16 items here. Does a 17th or an 18th come to mind, either in the AppSec realm or other types of security realms you perhaps have seen?
Oh, actually, so I was looking at this and I was thinking, one of the other terms that sometimes gets, there's two others that sometimes get misused, and how would we get a CISO derived from it? That's where I was losing it. I was thinking about influencers, which can be bad because, I posted an article once, therefore I'm an expert. Or the really evil one is the someone who follows the narrative. I'm sorry, folks, to make you react so badly on a Monday, but there's some, if you're trying to be politically correct, you'll be fine with the board, but you're not necessarily you got to be able to speak out about, the emperor has no clothes. You need to be able to talk turkey. Now you need to moderate it for the audience, but you still need to be able to express the accurate points. Otherwise, you're going to be painting it like it's a sunny day, whether it's raining or not.
Ooh,
so that's what I came up with. It's not as concise and as pretty as these two, but those two came to my mind. How about you? Did you get any off list
There's definitely
ones?
two. I don't have the pithy names for them, so I'm going to have to work on that. But the quote would be, the quotes for this AppSec persona caricature that we want to push against would be, just fix all the things. Yeah. Okay. So I don't think I need to explain any more of that one for Lee. And then the other one I will end on would be a little bit of what we talked about with Josh is just that attitude that AppSec purist that developers don't care about security or humans are the weakest link. Just ignoring the reality of threat models, ignoring the reality that people are part of systems. We need people. People write the code. So let's not insult them. Let's work with them.
Awesome.
So Lee, I want to thank you for joining me on having some fun at the end here. We're going to have to ask John what he thinks too. So this is a list I think he would have fun with as well. But this was a great time chatting. So thanks a lot for helping us start off a November.
Well, thank you for having me, Mike. It's been great. This has been a nice cap to my morning. Very much putting me in a wonderful mood.
Excellent. Well, hopefully there's a fourth cup of coffee in line for you today to help that mood. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us. Please do subscribe, hit that like button, check out the show notes. We have a lot more commentary there as well. And speaking of personas, check out Rabbit in the Headlights from Michael Oakley. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.